years ago, I got a call that changed my life. It was from a fiance who was back home visiting family for the weekend, and she said something that absolutely sideswiped me. And she said, "This isn't working for me. I don't want to do this anymore." And the next thing I know, a week later, and I'm living in the back of a 15-passenger van that I bought from an old church because I'm $80,000 in debt. I have no money in the bank, and I can't afford to live anywhere else. So I parked that van in the back of a climbing gym, and I run a power cord into the building. And that was my home for the next 4 months as I tried to figure out where everything had gone so wrong. That was easily the lowest I've ever felt. I was embarrassed, ashamed, and truthfully afraid. Afraid because I knew I was capable of more, and that if I kept on the same path, I was going to end up a sad, bitter, and regretful old man. Now, Maslow is a psychologist who's probably best known for his hierarchy of needs, which simply says humans are motivated by 5 basic categories of needs. We have our physiological needs, our safety, our love, our self-esteem, and our self-actualization. And you're probably familiar with this theory, but Maslow said something else that you may not have heard before. I hadn't. But when I did, it really changed how I viewed myself and the decisions I was making in my life. He said this: "That which we can be, we must be." It's a simple sentence, but what does it really mean? Well, to me at that moment in my life, living in the back of the van, it meant that we all feel we have the potential for greatness. After all, nobody thinks they're average. You're probably an above average driver, right? And an above average lover and above average intelligence. Now, obviously, this can't all be true. We can't all be above average. And yet, I do believe that each of us possesses the potential for greatness. For me, in the back of that van, I didn't feel great, but I believed, perhaps even delusionally, that I had the potential for greatness. And so from that rock bottom place where I had literally nothing else to lose, I went on a search, a quest to find my greatness. In this video, I'm going to share exactly how I tapped into it, how I got out of that van, and ultimately how I went from being $80,000 in debt to a millionaire in only 3 years. So number 1, I treated personal development as though it was my most important job. Now, for the past couple of years leading up to that point, I'd been a professional rock climber, which sounds really cool, but just means I made barely any money and spent all my time sleeping in the dirt and climbing on rocks. In the world of sports, it's easy to see that your body is your product. If you don't take care of it, it's not going to perform how you want it to. And so maximizing my performance depended on how I treated my body, how seriously I took my rest and recovery and nutrition, and all the little things that eventually add up to become really big things. And so step 1 in turning my life around was to take that same level of obsession and apply it to all parts of my life. Okay, full disclosure, it really wasn't all parts of my life. I'm pretty lazy, so I don't like working any harder than is strictly necessary. So I asked myself, what are the minimum number of levers I have to pull to get the maximum effect? Because I didn't want to be busy, I wanted to be effective. And so I looked for similarities in all the feedback I was getting from mentors and the research I was collecting. And you know what? I found that there were really only 4 levers I needed to pull. And I called them my 4 spheres of influence. Those spheres were mindset, health, wealth, and skills. So let's break them down. First, it all starts with mindset. Your mindset is the lens through which you see the world. If that lens is broken or scuzzy, then it's going to affect how you see and ultimately move through the world. So the clearer your mindset, the more clearly you'll triangulate your targets, avoid obstacles, and move directly towards your goals. Now, one book in particular was transformative for me. It was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This book was the personal journal of the emperor of the known world as he wrestled with all the same questions we still wrestle with hundreds of years later. What's the meaning of life? What's it mean to live a good life? Who am I? Why do I matter? This book gave me a framework for moving through the world and a perspective that oriented me towards the aspects of life that truly matter, namely the process and not the results. See, one of the recurring themes of the Stoics is that life's short and we're all going to die. And because of that, every moment is precious. And so you've got to make the most of it. But also, you've got to realize that none of this matters. And so don't take any of it too seriously. The more poise you can bring to your life, the less you ride the highs and the lows, ultimately the less you'll suffer. Now, I'm not a fan of suffering, so this seemed like a pretty good deal to me. So I focused on not getting caught up in life's roller coaster, which freed me to really focus in on performing in the moment. Because in the end, this moment and what you do with it is all that matters. The second sphere of influence was health. And because of my background as a rock climber, I had this sphere on lock. But for most people, this is the easiest place to start and the one that'll pay the biggest dividends. Seneca said, another Stoic philosopher, "The healthy man wants 1,000 things. The sick man wants but one." If you don't have your wealth, then what do you really have? Regardless of where you are on your health journey, here are the 3 areas to focus on to get the maximum effect: exercise, nutrition, sleep. It's pretty straightforward. Get up and move your body for at least 30 minutes a day. Pay attention to what you're putting into your body because, as software engineers say, if you put in junk, you'll get junk out. And get plenty of sleep. Seriously, you spend a quarter of your life sleeping, so it's well worth figuring out how to get this part dialed in. Now, the third sphere of influence was by far my weakest: wealth. If you're like me, you didn't grow up in a family that talked about finances, and it wasn't something they taught in school. If we return to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we realize that before we can worry about self-actualization, we have to worry about solving for our physical and shelter needs. And so for me, at that point in my life, I recognized solving for this sphere would have the biggest influence. As they say, money doesn't solve all your problems, but it does solve all your money problems. And I had a lot of money problems. So I set out to learn the rules of the money game because that's exactly what it is. It's a game. And anybody can win if they know how to play. Now, the fourth sphere of influence were my skills. And skills are probably the most valuable investment you can make because once acquired, they continue paying dividends for the rest of your life. The trick then is to figure out what are the most beneficial skills to acquire. Now, Elon Musk says you're paid in proportion to the magnitude of the problems that you solve. And as I inventoried my skills, I realized I had a great baseline of skills in a lot of areas, but none were particularly valuable. So I started asking around, talking to pretty much every successful person I could find, and I tried to figure out what were the most valuable skills I needed to develop. Here are just 2 of those skills I realized I needed to work on personally. First, the skill of discipline, or rather, the ability to hold myself accountable and actually do the things I said I would. Number 2 was communication. Your ability to communicate with the world, whether it's through the spoken word on a YouTube video or in a one-on-one conversation with a friend, through body language or through the written word. We're constantly communicating with the world, but often not very well. I quickly came to realize that if you want to have maximum impact or influence on the world, you have to be able to communicate effectively. Now, we're going to do another video diving into all the most high value skills that I think you need to hone to become a millionaire. Things like marketing, branding, product design, psychology, finance, investing, business, all of it. But for now, just start by assessing your current skills. Create a list of all your skills, the things that you are the best at in the world, and then create another list, imagining all the skills your future millionaire self possesses. What skills does that person have? And I'll write them out. Now you have a map for getting from where you are right now to where you want to be. And all you have to do is focus every single day on becoming marginally better at one of those skills. And in 3, 5, 10 years, you're going to be unrecognizably better. This is what it means to focus on the process, on the things within your control, and not the result. And before we move on to the second thing that I did to get from 80,000 in debt to a millionaire, let's quickly talk about coaching. A great coach can help you compress decades of learning into days. I'm a big fan of coaching, but in the beginning, if you don't have a bunch of money to spend, focus on the free resources like YouTube and Google. When you're finally ready to hire a coach, check out this video on lessons I've personally learned spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on coaching in the last couple of years, because trust me, you're not going to want to make some of these mistakes. So here's the second thing I did to become a millionaire in 3 years is I parked my ego at the door and I cut expenses ruthlessly. In the beginning, I had very little income. I worked around the clock on acquiring skills that would make me more valuable to the world, but that doesn't happen overnight. In the meantime, the only thing I could really control were my expenses. So I lived in that van for 4 months, and then I moved in with my best friend's mom, which for the record is really no different than living with your own mom. Not a good look for a 30-year-old man. A lot of people gave me crap for my living arrangement, but I didn't care because I knew it was the price I had to pay to buy the life I so desperately wanted. And as they say, you can have anything in life, but you can't have everything. So figure out what it is you want, what's it cost, and then pay that price and don't look back. Just park the ego at the door and keep moving forward. Now, the third thing I did to transform my life is where the rubber really meets the road. I started seeing actual progress. I built a business. Why? Because every person I looked up to, Charlie Munger, Felix Dennis, Elon Musk, they all said, to get wealthy, you have to find a way to stop trading your time for money. And the best way to do that is by owning a business. Now, quick side note, growing up, I was never very entrepreneurial. I never had a lemonade stand. I never plucked flowers from the neighbor and sold it back to them. In all my research, I kept hearing how important it was to disconnect the inputs of my time in exchange for the output of money. So I grabbed a couple $100s worth of cleaning supplies and I started washing windows. And then I hired a guy to wash the windows for me while I handled the marketing and the cold calling. And then I hired a guy to do that for me. And pretty soon I had a nice little cash generating business. And I had this epiphany. I love business. It was liberating and challenging, but most of all, it gave me a sense of purpose and also the means for changing the trajectory of my life. But making a bunch of money wasn't enough in and of itself to get me to where I wanted to be, which was a place of complete financial freedom. And see, this is where most people go off the track. They start making good money, but just as quickly as it comes in the door, it goes back out. It's called lifestyle creep. Suddenly you can afford that new car, that new apartment, that new everything. And so you go buy it. Don't fall into this trap. To truly build wealth, you have to move on to the fourth and final step, which got me from $80,000 in debt to $1 million in 3 years. You have to invest everything you possibly can. Now, there are all sorts of fantastic investment vehicles, but honestly, investing can feel pretty overwhelming for most people. It's something that most of us didn't learn growing up, and because it's so important, we're afraid we'll make a mistake. And so we outsource it to a financial advisor or a stockbroker, but this is wrong. If you want to win the money game, you have to know the rules. You can't rely on somebody else just telling you what to do. So I dove in, I researched everything under the sun, stocks, bonds, crypto, and yes, real estate. For me, I started investing with multifamily real estate, a triplex in particular, which I bought for $246,500. And now here a decade later, my portfolio has grown to around 70 million, but it didn't just jump there overnight. It was a small process of consistently reinvesting everything I was making in my businesses. Started small, by treating personal development as my number one job, by parking my ego at the door, building those businesses, making it my everything, and then reinvesting every penny back into investment opportunities, into assets, and getting the benefits of compounding interest. And that's it. That's seriously just how I got from being $80,000 in debt to 3 years later being a millionaire. It is that simple. It's not that easy, but if I can do it, then so can you.